I never thought taking my boss home after a company party would change everything. But when she looked at me across my kitchen table the next morning and asked that one question, I felt my entire world collapse around me. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing stories that will touch your heart. Mark Reynolds stared at the ceiling of his modest apartment, the events of the previous night replaying in his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. The company's annual holiday party had seemed like any other work function, until his boss, Elaine Winters, had won too many glasses of champagne. As the newly promoted senior accountant at Winters Financial, Mark had responsibilities beyond spreadsheets and client meetings. At 34, he was finally finding his footing after the devastating loss of his wife 3 years earlier. Their daughter, Sophie, now 7, was his entire world, his reason for waking up each morning, for pushing through the grief that sometimes still threatened to overwhelm him. The apartment was quiet now. Sophie was still asleep in her room, surrounded by the stuffed animals she insisted kept the bad dreams away. Mark checked his phone, 6:17 a.m. He had barely slept, his mind racing with worry about what had transpired and what might happen when his boss woke up in his guest room. Elaine Winters wasn't just any boss. As the CEO of Winters Financial, she had a reputation for being brilliant but demanding. Cold, some would say. Divorced twice, no children, completely devoted to the company her father had founded. Mark had always admired her business acumen from a distance, never imagining he'd find himself in this situation. The night before had started normally enough. The holiday party was held at the Grand, the most expensive hotel in the city. Mark had arranged for his neighbor, Mrs. Patel, to watch Sophie for the evening. He hadn't wanted to go, social functions still felt strange without Sarah by his side, but Elaine had made it clear that attendance was mandatory for all senior staff. "You clean up nice, Reynolds," Elaine had said when she spotted him by the bar, nursing a club soda. Her voice carried the slight edge it always did, but there was something softer in her expression that night. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was the glass of champagne in her hand, her third, by Mark's count. "Thank you, Ms. Winters," he'd replied, uncomfortable with the personal comment from someone who typically addressed him only about quarterly projections and client retention rates. "Elaine," she corrected him. "We're not in the office now." As the night progressed, Mark watched with growing concern as Elaine continued to drink. He'd never seen her like this before, her carefully maintained composure beginning to slip, her laughter becoming louder, her gestures more animated. When she nearly fell while attempting to demonstrate what she called her college dance moves, Mark knew something was wrong. "Are you all right?" he asked, catching her elbow to steady her. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her words slurred slightly. "Just celebrating a record year." "We crushed it, Mark. We absolutely crushed it." By midnight, most of the staff had departed, leaving only a handful of people, including several board members who were deep in conversation at a corner table. Mark was preparing to leave when he noticed Elaine attempting to order another drink, the bartender giving her a concerned look. "Ms. Winters, Elaine," Mark corrected himself, approaching cautiously. "I think it might be time to call it a night." She turned to him, her eyes struggling to focus. "You're probably right. Always the responsible one, aren't you, Reynolds?" "I try to be," he said quietly. "Let me call you a car." "No need," she said, fumbling with her phone. "I'll get my driver." But when she couldn't seem to unlock her phone after several attempts, Mark gently took it from her hands. "Let me help you." That's when he discovered her driver had been dismissed hours earlier, with instructions to return at 2 a.m. It was only 12:30. "I'll wait with you until your driver returns," Mark offered. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Go home to your daughter. I'll be fine in the hotel bar." Mark hesitated. He couldn't leave his boss in this state, not when she was clearly vulnerable and not thinking clearly. What if someone took advantage of the situation? What if the board members saw her like this? Her reputation could be damaged irreparably. "I can drive you home," he found himself saying. "It's not a problem." Elaine looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable even through the haze of alcohol. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Mark said. "But I want to make sure you get home safely." After some persuasion, Elaine finally agreed. Mark helped her to his car, a modest sedan that still had Sophie's booster seat in the back and cheerful music in the CD player. As they drove through the city streets, illuminated by holiday lights, Elaine grew quiet, staring out the window. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she murmured. "The lights. I always loved Christmas lights as a child." Mark glanced at her, surprised by the personal revelation. "Sophie loves them too. We drive around looking at decorations every weekend in December." "Sophie," Elaine repeated. "Your daughter. How old is she now?" 7, Mark answered, a small smile forming automatically at the thought of his daughter. "Going on 17, sometimes." "You're lucky," Elaine said softly, still looking out the window. "To have someone." The vulnerability in her voice caught Mark off guard. Before he could respond, Elaine directed him to turn onto a tree-lined street of elegant townhouses. When they pulled up to her address, Mark helped her from the car, supporting her as she stumbled slightly on the walkway. "Keys?" he asked gently. Elaine fumbled in her small evening bag, eventually producing a key ring. As Mark tried to identify which key would open the front door, Elaine suddenly lurched forward, her face paling. "I'm going to be sick," she whispered urgently. What happened next was a blur. Elaine was violently ill on her own doorstep, ruining her expensive shoes and the hem of her dress. Mark managed to hold her hair back, offering what comfort he could to a woman who, until tonight, had seemed untouchable, almost inhuman in her perfection. When the episode passed, Elaine looked mortified, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I never drink this much." Mark made a quick decision. "You can't stay here alone tonight. You need someone to make sure you're okay." "I'll be fine," she insisted weakly. "With all due respect, Ms. Winters, you won't be. And I can't leave you like this." After a brief argument that Elaine lacked the energy to win, Mark helped her back to his car. He called Mrs. Patel, explaining that he'd be later than expected and asking if she could stay with Sophie until he returned. The kind woman agreed immediately. "Is everything all right, Mark?" Mrs. Patel asked, concern evident in her voice. "Yes, just a work situation I need to handle," he replied, glancing at Elaine who had already dozed off in the passenger seat. When they arrived at his apartment building, Mark faced the challenge of getting his boss upstairs without drawing attention. Thankfully, the lobby was empty at that late hour. In the elevator, Elaine leaned heavily against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You smell nice," she murmured, half asleep. "Like cinnamon." Mark felt his cheeks warm. "Sophie and I were baking cookies earlier." Mrs. Patel was waiting when they entered the apartment, her eyes widening at the sight of Elaine Winters, whose reputation preceded her even in circles far removed from the financial world. "Thank you so much," Mark whispered to his neighbor. "I'll explain everything later." After Mrs. Patel left, Mark guided Elaine to the guest room, which was really just his home office with a pull-out sofa. He found a clean t-shirt and sweatpants for her to change into and placed a glass of water and some aspirin on the nightstand. "The bathroom is across the hall," he explained. "There's a new toothbrush in the medicine cabinet if you need it." Elaine looked around the modest room, taking in the family photos on the desk, the children's drawings pinned to a corkboard, the stack of bedtime story books in the corner. "This is your life," she said softly, almost to herself. "It is," Mark replied, unsure what else to say. "It's beautiful," Elaine whispered, and for a moment, Mark thought he saw longing in her eyes. He left her to change and check on Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully, her dark curls, so like her mother's, spread across the pillow. Mark brushed a gentle kiss against her forehead before returning to the guest room to check on Elaine. She was already asleep, still in her party dress, curled on top of the covers. Mark carefully removed her shoes and placed a light blanket over her before quietly closing the door. That night, he slept fitfully on the couch, worried about what the morning would bring. Would Elaine be embarrassed? Angry? Would his job be at risk for having seen his boss in such a vulnerable state? When morning came, Mark woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. He found Elaine there, wearing the clothes he'd left for her hair damp from a shower, attempting to make coffee. "Good morning," he said cautiously. She turned, her face composed but her eyes revealing her discomfort. "Good morning, Mark. I hope you don't mind, but I helped myself to your shower and coffee." "Not at all," he replied, moving to take over the coffee preparation. "How are you feeling?" "Physically?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," she admitted. "Emotionally?" "Mortified beyond words." Mark smiled gently. "There's no need to be embarrassed. It happens to everyone." "Not to me," she said firmly. "Never to me." They sat at the small kitchen table, mugs of coffee between them, an awkward silence stretching out. Mark was about to speak when Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched in one arm. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and curious as she noticed the stranger at their table. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mark said, opening his arms. Sophie ran to him, climbing onto his lap. "This is Ms. Winters. She works with Daddy." Sophie studied Elaine with the direct, unfiltered gaze of a child. "You're pretty," she declared. "But you look sad." Elaine seemed startled by the observation. "I'm just tired," she replied, her voice gentler than Mark had ever heard it. "When I'm tired, Daddy makes me pancakes," Sophie informed her seriously. "They have chocolate chips and smiley faces." Mark laughed softly. "Would you like some pancakes, Ms. Winters?" Something shifted in Elaine's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that Mark had glimpsed the night before. "I'd like that very much," she said. "And please, call me Elaine." As Mark prepared breakfast, Sophie chattered away to Elaine, showing her drawings and telling her about school with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of childhood. To Mark's surprise, Elaine engaged fully with his daughter, asking questions and listening intently to the answers. When Sophie ran off to get dressed, Elaine watched her go with an expression Mark couldn't quite decipher. "You've done an amazing job with her," she said quietly. "Especially on your own." Mark placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but she makes it worthwhile." Elaine was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with one finger. "Can I ask you something, Mark?" "Of course," he replied, sitting across from her. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "How do you do it? How do you balance everything, being a father, your career, your grief, and still manage to be kind to someone who doesn't deserve it?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning beyond the simple words. Mark felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, opening up possibilities he had never considered. "I don't know if I balance it well," he admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But Sophie needs me to be strong, so I try. And kindness costs nothing, but it means everything." Elaine's eyes filled with tears, surprising them both. "I've spent my entire life building a company, proving myself in a man's world, showing no weakness. And what do I have to show for it? A big empty house, 2 failed marriages, and employees who fear me instead of respect me." Mark reached across the table, hesitating before gently covering her hand with his. "It's never too late to change course." "Isn't it?" she asked, vulnerability naked in her voice. "I'm 45 years old, Mark. I've spent decades becoming this person. And you can spend the next decades becoming someone else, he said simply. If that's what you want. Sophie bounded back into the kitchen, now dressed in mismatched clothes that made Mark smile. The moment between him and Elaine passed, but something had fundamentally changed. After breakfast, Mark drove Elaine home. The ride was quiet but comfortable, the awkwardness of the morning giving way to a strange new understanding. When he pulled up to her townhouse, Elaine turned to him. "Thank you, Mark. Not just for last night, but for this morning. For showing me a glimpse of what life could be." "You're welcome," he replied, unsure what else to say. "I'd like to make some changes," she continued. "At work, in my life. And I'd like your help, if you're willing." Mark looked at her, seeing not his intimidating boss but a woman at a crossroads. "I'd be honored," he said honestly. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to appear at Winters Financial. Elaine instituted a flexible work policy for parents, created a mentorship program for young employees, and even started hosting monthly team lunches where business talk was prohibited. Mark found himself spending more time with Elaine, first as an advisor on these new initiatives, then gradually as a friend. They would meet for coffee to discuss work, but the conversations inevitably drifted to more personal topics, books they loved, places they wanted to visit, stories from their childhoods. 3 months after the holiday party, Elaine invited Mark and Sophie to dinner at her home. As Sophie explored the garden, fascinated by the koi pond, Elaine turned to Mark. "I've been thinking about that night, and your kindness," she said. "It changed everything for me. Made me realize what I've been missing." Mark smiled. "I'm glad something good came from such an awkward situation." "More than good," Elaine said softly. "Life-changing." As the sun set over the garden, casting golden light across Sophie's delighted face as she chased butterflies, Mark felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah died, a sense of possibility, of a future that might hold more than just survival. That one question Elaine had asked him across his kitchen table, "How do you do it?" had indeed shattered his life. But not in the way he'd feared. Instead, it had broken open a shell he'd built around himself, allowing light to enter places that had been dark for too long. 6 months later, when Elaine nervously asked him a second life-changing question, "Would you and Sophie like to have dinner with me again, but maybe as more than friends this time?" Mark found himself saying yes without hesitation. Life rarely follows the path we expect. Sometimes it takes a detour through pain and loss before leading us to unexpected joy. For Mark Reynolds, taking his drunk boss home had been an act of simple kindness. He could never have imagined that her question the next morning would shatter the walls he'd built around his heart, creating space for a new kind of happiness to grow from the fragments. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Remember that sometimes the moments that seem to break us are actually breaking us open, making room for something beautiful to enter. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.